Hi there, I'm Lance, and these are my legends. I'd love to have you make comments in the comment section or please subscribe. I had a situation yesterday that really brought home what I should talk about today in my legend. My wife and two of my sister-in-laws and my niece were traveling from Provo, Utah down to Nevada for a wedding. And I had two choices. I could go down a day early and go golfing, which I'm not a golfer, or I could ride down in a car full of girls and for 5 hours. Ended up being a lot longer than that, but I chose to stay home and go skiing. And I was up just a few minutes before the lodge opened up on Bear Claw at Sundance. I was feeling my age, so I'd gone into the lodge, and all of a sudden I felt impressed to call my wife, and she didn't answer, which is the norm for my wife and her cell phone. She doesn't usually answer. And I didn't think anything of it, and then the phone rang about 2 or 3 minutes later. It was just a couple of minutes before 11, and she said, "We were just rear-ended by a semi-truck going 90 miles an hour." And I said goodbye to my friends at the lodge and ran out and threw on my skis and skied down the mountain as quickly as I could without having my pass pulled again. And I just jumped in the truck and I, with all haste, made my way to Nephi, Utah. It took an hour and I got to Nephi. Everyone was okay. It was a miracle. The gas tank had been ripped from the back of their brand new Wagoneer, and the airbags had not deployed, and they survived. I have participated in a lot of what people consider dangerous activities. I've been told many times I'm crazy, and in fact one of my nicknames is Crazy Lance, but I have been injured a few times. I just a couple of years ago was skiing way too fast on a new pair of skis that weren't as stable as I had hoped at high speed, and I flew quite a distance and landed on my shoulder with my feet above my head and popped my lung. I didn't puncture it, I popped it from the impact and had crepitus. It's quite an amazing injury. Your air escapes your chest cavity and you have like bubble pack under your skin and pop the bubbles underneath it. It was a crazy injury. And that was a skiing injury, and I also pretty well hammered my shoulder in what I'd call a hard landing in my hang glider quite a few years ago, and really tore up my shoulder. But by far the most violent, critical injuries I've ever had are in car accidents. And I have totaled quite a few cars in my life. And that's what I'd like to tell you a story about today. We had a pretty good storm. It was in December, and I was driving a Rabbit, a Volkswagen Rabbit, which weighs about 1,800 pounds, just a little teeny lightweight, very agile car, front-wheel drive. And I had a great big hammer drill, the biggest hammer drill Bosch made at the time. And I had a couple hundred pieces of 30-inch rebar in the back of the little hatch of the Rabbit, and a couple of big fat extension cords, and I was making my way, gone up through Heber and was just coming up to the top of Daniels Canyon. And there's what we call suicide lane, two lanes going up, one coming down, and I was passing an old rear-wheel drive car. It had snowed a couple inches the night before, and then it was sub-zero. It was super cold. Beautiful, clear day, but it was cold. The wind was howling. And as I got near the top of the canyon, this lady started to fishtail. And I was just passing her at the time. And I'd never had a front-wheel drive car before, and I'd only owned that Rabbit a short time, so I really hadn't gotten into the skid mode and how to control the car in a skid. And I let off the gas, which put me into a skid. And because the front wheels all of a sudden slowed down, back wheels were still going faster as I was overtaking this lady. And so all of a sudden I slid this way, and I slid back that way, and I slid back this way, and about 30 feet in front of my windshield was a 1967 Buick Electra, one of the larger production cars ever made in the United States. I think it weighed about 4,500 pounds, plus the contents. So it was closing on 2.5 tons, and I was in this little teeny Volkswagen, and by the time the car came around, it was just a split second, and then we had impact. And I didn't have my seatbelt on. I bent the steering wheel with my hands. I was in great shape. That's what saved my life. I was in great condition at the time. Actually, that's not what saved my life. God saved my life. I was protected. I was in a bad situation. The back window and the front window were all smashed, but they were still there because they're safety glass. And there was rebar sticking through things in the dashboard, and the motor had come down into the car. When I hit that Electra, I actually went from 60 miles an hour going forward and actually bounced backwards about 100 feet. And just in that split second, there was so much impact, there was so much violence, that it was just hard to imagine. My face was all torn up. I had 2 great big cuts across here. My jaw was broken in 14 places. I could feel bones inside my mouth. I could see bones and feel bones sticking out of my chin. That's what this scar is from. Thank heavens for Niles Harrod. He's a brilliant doctor, still a friend, and he put me back together. I have some steel plates. Him and Lowell Anderson did the work. Great doctors. They're both retired. But anyway, I was in a bad spot. I was pinned in the car, and all of a sudden my boot felt like it was filling with water, and I looked down. I debated whether or not to do this, but I think I'll do it anyway. My leg was almost cut off. You can see this scar, and my calf muscle was intact, but the bones were sticking out of my Levi's. I looked down, and there were my tibia and fibula sticking through my pants, and I was bleeding bad. And my chest had been collapsed, my lungs, my heart, my sternum was split. I was busted up, and I couldn't move. The motor had come forward and pinned me in the car. And I remember a couple of truckers that stopped traffic, obviously, and a couple of truckers, they came walking up and they looked down the car. One guy said, "Well, he's not going to make it." And the other guy says, "No, he's a goner." And I was like, "I ain't dead yet. Please help me out here." And the lady that had been next to me that started fishtailing, she was feeling desperately bad. And she came up and she asked if there was anything she could do. And for the second time in my life, I knew that I had to apply a tourniquet to save my life because I was bleeding out pretty fast. And I told her I needed to make a tourniquet. And she says, "Well, how do I do that? How do I do that?" I said, "Well, find me a piece of rope or a thin piece of leather or something." And she found a piece of cord, and I tied it around above my knee and grabbed a piece of rebar and twisted it up until the bleeding slowed. And then she put a big old wool blanket over me because it was sub-zero. It was freezing cold. The wind was howling through that little car, and I was just sitting there. And it took about an hour for the paramedics to get there because they had to be notified. It was before cell phones. And so someone had to drive down to Heber and advise the police that there'd been an accident, and they jumped in the ambulance. And by the time they got up to me, I'd been sitting there for an hour in that car, trapped. And the couple that hit me totaled their Electra. I felt really bad about that. They were very good about it. They forgave me for causing the accident. They were not hurt. They were older. I say that. They were probably younger than I am now. Because I was in critical condition. They had to cut the car open. They had to pull me out of the car and then laid me out on a stretcher. And then we took a raucous ride down to Heber City. And when I got there was a doctor in the emergency room, and he must have been in the military, because he started barking orders and had nurses jumping here and there, and they immediately started to give me blood. They gave me 3 pints of blood. And when you've lost a lot of blood, the capillaries in your bloodstream expand to a certain point to make up for the volume, your red and your white blood cells. And I was doing okay, and I could feel the blood, the volume coming into me, and even though the blood wasn't warm, it wasn't really a warm feeling, but it was just a good feeling. They were still losing me, and the doctor was really getting desperate, and he yelled at this nurse to crank that thing wide open on the blood feed. Well, she was a little flustered from all the yelling, and she turned it off. And I've experienced catatonic shock a couple of times in my life. It's a very odd sensation. All of a sudden, everything goes, whew. And you get really far away, and you can see about that much in front of you. Everything else is dark, and it's like you're kind of there, but you're kind of not. And the doctor came on court, because all of a sudden all of my vitals tanked, and she realized her mistake and cranked that blood wide open again, and I could tell they were feeling the liability of this situation and the critical nature of my condition. And so they got me stabilized, gave me 3 pints of blood, and then at that point they'd cut off all my clothes, and they tossed me in an ambulance. And I don't know how fast it took, but I don't think it took 30 minutes to drive from Heber to Provo that day, because we had the sirens going, and I remember rolling back and forth. In the back of this ambulance, they had me strapped down, and we were rolling. I mean, I love that driver. He's my kind of guy. And we cruised, and we got down there, and I was single, and I was going to a singles ward. And we get down there, they wheel me in, and I'm butt naked, laying there completely in my birthday suit. And they're shopping me to all these doctors, because they need a cardiologist, they need a respiratory specialist, they need a orthopedic, they need a plastic surgeon or a maxillofacial surgeon. They need, they needed about 6 doctors. And so they were, they sent the word out, and, they had the guys that were on call, and they could tell this was not a normal put back together thing. So the doctors all came in, and meantime, there were 2 girls that I knew that were nurses in the ER, and, but I was so hurt that it really, it didn't matter. I didn't worry too much about that. And I remember just being almost like I was just watching myself, just near death, laying there and just hoping that things would work out for me. The doctors, the specialists that I needed came, and they scheduled everybody. They got the OR scheduled. They had me on a gurney, and they got me all prepped. They'd x-rayed my chest, they'd x-rayed my legs, they'd x-rayed my face, and they had a lot of pictures to take. So I was in the radiology department for a while meantime, and they were having to hurry because I was fading fast. Finally, they were wheeling me towards the operating room, and I had a visitation. I didn't see a being, but just as clear as any conversation I've ever had in my life, I was asked, "Do you want to die?" I was divorced at the time. I'd been going through some really hard things in my life. It was kind of like, it'd sure be a lot easier on the other side for you. I said, "No, I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And this was all in my mind. It was a very distinct conversation, and it was, why not? Why don't you want to die? It'll be so much easier. You won't have all this pain. You're going to have a long road of recovery. I thought of one thing, and that was my unborn children. I wanted to be the father and the grandfather that I knew I could be. and that I knew I was destined to be. Well, that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I knew, I came to in critical care. I was in intensive care for a week. Then I was in the hospital, but since I didn't have medical insurance, I finally convinced them, you guys just let me go home because I can't afford this. And 9 days in the hospital, a week of it was intensive care, operating room costs, the entire bill was $7,800. That didn't count doctors or radiologists or anesthesiologists, because I got their bills separately. But my hospital bill was $7,800. I remember my bishop, Niles Elwood, came in, and it was right at the time of the year the LDS Church does tithing settlement. And he goes, Lance, you don't need to pay tithing this year. And I looked at him and I said, Bishop, I need to pay tithing now more than ever. I need the Lord's help to get through this situation. And I had paid tithing up to that point, and I only had, I can't remember, I think I owed $30. And I had a friend pay him, told him I'd pay him back. And so I was square. And I'll tell you what, folks, the Lord is good. Jesus Christ loves us. And the experience with my little honey Sherry almost getting killed yesterday, she could have very easily been burned to death if that gas tank that was ripped off the car had ruptured. I wanted to share that story. Be careful on the roads. I hope you enjoyed that video. It's a lot different than videos I've done in the past, but I would love it if you will subscribe and make some comments on this. Hit the like button. I'm trying to build up this channel. We're doing real well. Been on for just about a month. Watch this all the way through, too. Watch the videos all the way through. I appreciate you guys. And I do have some people lined up. One of the fellows that I had lined up to come in, we've had a hard time connecting, and he had a death in the family this week, so I'm not sure when that'll be, but I've got some great legends lined up. People from all walks of life. Amazing people that have stories like you to tell. And we need to share them with each other. I hope you enjoyed today. This is Lance's Legends. Thanks for watching.